お互いに最後まで
勝負が。
ボスの指令で
さあボスの指令、サーナイトが来る。
ファントムダイブ宣言します。
さあしかしドラパルトは混乱している。
待てなら勝ち。
技を打てるかどうか。
In most regions, the way you qualify for the World Championships isn't too complex. You start with your locals, such as challenges and cups, gather points, play regionals and international events, and by the end, if you have enough points, then you qualify for the World Championships. Quite simple if you ask me. However, in Japan, it's quite different, and a lot more difficult. You see, Japan has a lot more people that try to qualify for Worlds every year. In fact, it's into the hundreds of thousands. And the fact that only over 100 people qualify, it's not very likely that if you're trying to go for your World Championships invite, that you're going to get it. So how can we get it though? They do have tournaments such as city leagues, and these are tournaments that you're allowed to attend once per quarter, so 4 times a year. Whereas we can attend as many cups as possible to try and fill our best finish quota. Whereas Japanese players, they attend 4, once per quarter, and that's that. If you bomb out, you bomb out. And even winning 2 of the 4 events you attend won't be enough to qualify for Worlds. So that's where you start looking at the Champions Leagues. Champions Leagues are 5,000 player events where the top 4 qualify for Worlds. To put that into perspective, that is 0.08% odds. Those odds are similar to being accepted into Harvard, so not likely. Not only that, these events are best of 1. Yeah, it sucks. So if you're a Japanese player and you qualify for Worlds, well, you're a great player, because that is no fluke. So let's take a look at what I think might be the most interesting way one of these Champions Leagues has ever ended. Champions League Miyagi 2025. So the stage is set. After 15 rounds, these players have made it to the grand finals of Miyagi Champions League 2025. These 2 players being Shun Ito and Miyoshi Riku. Both of these players deserve to be here. The decks that these 2 players are playing are Dragapult and Gardevoir, the 2 best decks in the room, and some of the most represented decks in the tournament. So it's at no one's surprise that they've met in the grand finals. And the way this match plays out is quite interesting. The game started out as most Dragapult and Gardevoir matchups do, with a slower approach, neither player wanting to make a move until they are comfortably set up. If Dragapult is able to set up faster than Gardevoir, usually Gardevoir can't do anything about this and gets board wiped, as they are unable to evolve into their Gardevoirs. However, if Gardevoir can be evolved, the matchup becomes a lot more winnable. Not only do you have Monkidori to move the damage that Dragapult does to you back to them, you also have access to a card that all Dragapult players fear. You see, even though Dragapult is a Dragon-type Pokemon, the type that is notorious for not having any weaknesses, as the Fairy type rotated a few years ago, a new card was printed called Clefairy, and Clefairy isn't anything special at first glance. However, it has an ability that states, while it's in play, all Dragon-type Pokemon are weak to Psychic, and now, all of a sudden, Gardevoir, that was previously dealing 190 damage, is able to swing for 380 and one-shot Dragapult. This is really important, as before this card was printed, Gardevoir had no great way to deal with the Dragapult. On Riku's first turn, he was able to establish a Ralts and a Monkidori, with a Badoo inactive, which is quite solid. On the other hand, Ito's first turn looked a lot more clunky, as he had to Ultra Ball for a Dreepy, attach a TM Evo to the Pheasantipity inactive, and Iono.
そうですね、技マシンエボリューションもついたので、
はい、
目指すところがエボリューションだとすると、ドラメシアをさらに展開して、はい、エネルギーも引き込んでいきたい。
これができれば、来ましたね、ドラメシアいた。ただ、エネルギーがどうか。
He was able to find a second Dreepy, but unfortunately was unable to find an energy to utilize his TM Evo. This meant that those 2 Dreepies on the bench would be unable to evolve, which is important as Dracloaks are the main draw engine of Dragapult. On top of that, he was unable to find any Duskulls to start pressuring multi-price turns later on. This was really bad for Ito, as moving into his next turn, he knew he'd be unable to use items, so his options were really limited. Riku had a great second turn, establishing a second Monkidori and attaching a Bravery Charm to the Badoo to up its HP to 80.
さあムズムズカフェンの宣言でターンが終わりました。さあ対して苦しくなりそうです。伊藤選手、ここから
ドロンチがあるのは一ついいポイントですね。
はい、偵察指令は使うことができる。
ドロンチに進化します。
Fortunately for Ito, he was able to manually evolve into a Dracloak on the next turn, and found an Iono, which gave him a Badoo of his own, a rescue board to retreat into said Badoo, and an energy for his Dracloak, threatening a turn 3 Dragapult. The Badoo in this position was a great attacker, as he noticed that 2 of Riku's Gardevoirs were in the discard pile, meaning that without items, Riku would have a very difficult time establishing a Gardevoir, and this yielded great results, as it forced Riku to discard his hand with research discarding the ever-powerful Clefairy and a Night Stretcher, which could come back to bite him. His Night Stretcher is a great card to retrieve cards from the discard pile, and since there were 2 Gardevoirs already in the discard pile, this meant his later efforts of establishing a Gardevoir could be difficult. However, this research was able to find his 3rd copy of Gardevoir EX, and this allowed him to knock out Ito's Badoo while preventing him from using items on the following turn. In this position, Ito is at a major disadvantage, staring down a Gardevoir, 2 Monkeydories, a backup Ralts, and a Badoo, while his biggest achievement is a Dracloak with a single energy. He'd have to have a pop-off turn to stay in the game. However, looking at his hand, that wasn't really going to happen. His best option was Arven, and this wasn't great as Arven searches for items, and those aren't very useful while you're under item lock. But thanks to Rico taking a knockout on his previous turn, Ito's Pheasantipity, which started off as a liability, had become his lifeline. As his ability reads, if one of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you may draw 3 cards, and that's exactly what he did.
に育てられる状況になると、伊藤選手的には苦しくなってくるのかなと思うので、この今出てきたヨマールがしっかりねカーストボムを
This was able to net him an Iono, which found him his 2nd copy of TM Evo, and this finally allowed Ito to create a threatening board state, allowing for multiple Dracloaks in play, meaning more cards the next turn, while Riku still felt comfortable as from his perspective, it looked like Ito was constantly on the back foot. His following turn lacked any form of threat however, and he was unable to take advantage of the situation, due to the lack of energy in the discard pile. Thanks to this, Ito was able to survive a turn that could have been devastating. If Riku was able to establish a Screamtail and snipe his Dracloak, this could have been game-ending. He also made a mistake. He benched Mew EX, an easy 2-price target for Ito, which could become a massive liability, as without a Bravery Charm, Mew EX was susceptible to being knocked out by Dragapult in one attack, and that's exactly what would come to happen on Ito's following turn. After being able to establish yet another Dracloak, all of a sudden, he took the lead. However, for those of you who play the Pokemon trading card game, you'll be fully aware of how comfortable Gardevoir is while playing from behind, as this allows access to cards such as Countercatcher, which couldn't be used otherwise.
いいカードがある、それをつけていく。
カウンターキャッチャー。はい。はい、サマヨル。
さあ、サマヨルを狙っていきます。
まあそうですね。カーストボムがやっぱり自分の盤面を崩してくるので、そこから倒しに行きますね。
And just like that, Countercatcher brought up one of Ito's Dusclops, and with a 3rd Monkeydory in play, all of that damage that Dragapult spread was sent back, and with the 10 damage that Badoo deals, the deceptively powerful Flowerbud had claimed a 2nd victim. This was a great heads-up play from Riku as it established a 3rd Monkeydory while removing a threat from the board and keeping up in the prize race. Ito had a difficult decision to make here. All of Riku's Pokemon were above the 60 HP threshold that Dragapult dealt to the bench, meaning he'd only be able to take 1 prize card, unless he uses Dusknoir. But instead of going aggressive, he saved the Dusknoir for a later turn, hoping he'd be able to find more value for its costly ability.
さあ、キチキキスを逃がして、ドラパルト EX が前に出てきます。
そしてボスの指令も引き込んでたように見えたので、この番もまた呼び出しっていう可能性があります。
さあ、ポートはまだ使っていません。
ファントムダイブで倒れます。
さあ、ファントムダイブ、スモーミに打ってきました。
Unfortunately for him, this could have been a mistake, as the following turn, Riku was able to utilize his Countercatcher as he was still behind on prize cards to target the Dusknoir. Not only that, he was able to utilize his army of Monkeydories to take out the bench Duskull, meaning Ito had no more access to his oh-so-powerful Dusknoir in this critical stage of the game. This put Riku in the lead, and in a position where he only needed 2 more prize cards to win the game, and become the 2025 Miyagi Champions League winner. However, Ito still had life in him. He made an incredible play which saw him use Arven to find Defiance Band, and paired this with a Countercatcher meant he could knock out a Monkeydory with Dracloak, which was a 1-prizer. This also meant that Riku would be unable to use Countercatcher as they would now be on level prize cards.
ここはサイド1枚しか取られないドロンチで負けんき鉢巻きも込みでリューズヘッド100ダメージを与えていこうという番になりますね。いやかなり伊藤選手も厳しい状況ではあると思うんですが、その中でもこのベストな戦術を選ぶことができる。
素晴らしいですね。
And now, Riku had to feel the consequences of his previous turns, as he lacked the resources to retrieve his Clefairy in the discard pile, as his final Night Stretcher was in his prize cards. All he could do was force up Gardevoir, play Iono, and take a knockout.
さあ、サイコエンブレスを使ってダメ感を乗せて逃げてきました、マシマシラ。アドレナブレインは2回使えます。
最大ダメ感6個を返せるわけですが、ただその6個で何かを倒せるというわけではない盤面になってますね。ドロンチも残り HP70 ですね。
なので最大限ドロンチに乗せたでしょうか。そうですね、はい。さあ、そしてミラクルオーセ、ドロンチを落としました。このターンで勝負つかず。
However, with this knockout came a gift. Riku had found his final copy of Night Stretcher, which would allow him to retrieve his Clefairy on the following turn and win the game. He knew Ito would be unable to knock out the Gardevoir due to its 310 HP, so at least it could tank a hit, as long as there was no disruption. So as Riku sat there, Ito played out his turn, and his supporter for that turn was Iono. Riku's lifeline was now being placed at the bottom of his deck. His Gardevoir took the hit of 200 damage, and now he only had one decision.
どうかこのターン、そしてなんじゃも
さあ、あとは夜の単価などがあればリリアの PPX が出て、相手のドラパルト EX の弱点をね超タイプにしてミラクルフォースでフィニッシュみたいなところも狙えたりはします。
As Ito still had 2 prize cards left, Riku could retreat the Gardevoir and attack with Munkidori. Not only would this mean that Ito would need a gusting card like a boss or countercatcher, he'd also need a little bit of luck. You see, Munkidori is great for more than just moving damage. His attack does a decent 60 damage, but also leaves your opponent's active Pokemon confused. The way that confusion works in this game is that when you announce an attack, you'll need to flip a coin. If it lands on heads, your attack goes through. If tails, your attack fails, and you deal 30 damage to yourself. You can see where this is going. Riku knew all he had to do was buy one more turn, but it would be up to luck whether he got that turn or not. Ito announced boss's orders to bring up that damaged Gardevoir, and declared his attack.
ファントムダイブ宣言します。
さあしかしドラパルトは混乱している。
手なら勝ち。
技を打てるかどうか。
Both of these players' efforts coming into the weekend and the honor of sitting at the table in the finals of a 5,000 player event had led up to a 50-50 of either player's victory. In the end, all you need is a little luck.
ガッツポーズ。届きました。苦しかったが決して諦めなかった。伊藤俊チャンピオンズリーグ2025宮城大逆転優勝と